Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Priceless Advice with Leaders of Volunteers. I am Dana Litwin, and today I'm really genuinely delighted to welcome David Horwitz, who's MA, CVA, and recently did an Alive Academy about marketing. And I think this is a skill that is very, very important among all the skills and hats and plates that we spin in the air as leaders of volunteers. So I'm really eager to jump into it. Welcome, David.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here, Dana.
And I saw that you had an Alive Academy, so that's webinars and kind of learning opportunities that Alive, Association of Leaders in Volunteer Engagement, our professional network offers. And they're free to Alive members and nominal fee for folks to watch them live or tune in later. And I'll put the link to the webinar on Alive's website below. But I found that I had to teach myself marketing skills. I came from kind of a music and theater and event performance and production background, so that helped. But there are so many skill sets that go into being a leader of volunteers, and especially someone like you who has a master's degree and has a CVA. What do you talk about in your webinars that you think are some of the most important things for people to know about the basics of marketing, especially around recruitment and reaching the right audience to get volunteers?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. And I actually have some pretty radical views, I feel like, as a communications practitioner who's always been interested in the intersection of communications for social impact. In fifth grade, I started my life of volunteering and service, and at the same time, I was also trying to figure out my career path. And my uncle had an advertising agency, and this one time I was in the pool with my friend, and she was like, but advertising is so manipulative. And I was like, you're right. And so I kind of over time just combined these passions. And I think what I've realized most over my career and with my education and communications and a decade of experience in volunteer engagement in a professional sense, is that it's much simpler, I think, than people often realize. And it's just making sure that you have kind of a strategy ahead of time, and that you've done some even nominal research at the beginning to set yourself up for success. And while I think nominal research is better than nothing, there's easy ways to dive deeper into your audiences and into your markets to be successful. So I guess, my main takeaway is that I think every volunteer engagement professional should consider themselves to be in part a marketer, and that these skills are required for this job.
It absolutely is. And often in my work, as a consultant and also when I've worked full time for agencies, it's great when you can take volunteer services or as a volunteer coordinator at any level in your career, manager, director, and align your recruitment with the agency or the organization's marketing, PR, external affairs, whatever they're calling themselves. But more often than not, it's a department of one person trying to do this and understand these skills. And it can be really overwhelming. And I completely agree with your point that that early lesson of, oh, we perceive marketing because most of the time it is in a commercial or for-profit sense to be manipulative, to be dishonest. And I found that was a turnoff and a bias for myself learning those skills because I felt like I don't want to learn how to manipulate people. But in volunteer engagement, our job is really to tell the truth and to be as transparent as possible in the recruitment so that people don't feel like they're being, getting a bait and switch. And that's probably the lesson I've imparted to clients and with agencies is we're not trying to trick anybody. It's the opposite of how you would think about marketing because we really need to tell the truth so people can self-select and be the best fit for these roles.
Absolutely. I mean, marketing is all about matching, your offering or your opportunity or your impact to the available and correct audience. And I think there's just so many important uses of a marketing lens or a communications lens for thinking about how we operate in nonprofits. I mean, even as something as simple as ensuring that your audience that's serving the community is representative of the community itself. and making sure that you have a diverse and inclusive volunteer pool. I think that's, definitely an important way that we use marketing. I think too, marketing is very, it's the point is that it's targeted. And so sometimes I think marketing is important for recruitment, but I think expanding even how we think about marketing in the nonprofit world is really helpful. Like how we advocate for volunteer resources in the organization, or how we persuade partners to get involved with our activities. I think there's just too many applications of marketing that research and that strategy can help with.
Yeah, and I've noticed some of the Tuesday tips that I've done on this channel as well. One of the most popular has been my philosophy of in volunteer recruitment, never say need. Say join, use active verbs. So there's not just the strategy of what audience are you targeting, who do you want to be in the talent pool that you're pulling from, and where are those folks, what platforms are they on, what channels are they on, are they coming to your website, are they not going to your website? So there's a kind of some more technical and logistical marketing campaign set up like that. But what I found is very often people are doing the same thing over and over again to the same audience of the classic demographic of volunteer engagement, which is older, retire, probably wealthier, probably whiter demographic audiences, and wondering why they're not getting different results if they're trying to reflect the diversity of the community.
And I know there's a lot of controversy around the Net Promoter Score as
Right, right.
a way to evaluate volunteer satisfaction and retention and success, but it truly is a different that we can see, if a volunteer is generally satisfied with our programs, then they might be heavily satisfied and never tell anybody else about it. So the Net
Exactly.
Promoter Score really allows us to see, well, who loves it so much that they would recommend it to a friend or colleague.
And that,
Um,
yeah, completely. That ties into interview and work done by my colleague Rosanna Galindo has been featured, and she created academically a volunteer satisfaction index framework that she gives out for free to academics. And there's a very slight licensing fee for nonprofits, but it does that exact thing that you're talking about, that there can be a bias in the data because people who don't like it quit or don't respond, and people who are having a good experience maybe kind of oversell the positivity of what's going on with them, and kind of translating a VSI as an academic tool to a standard marketing tool for a volunteer survey. That's a really interesting balance. When you did the Alive Academy marketing webinar, did that come up when in discussions with the folks who were attending the webinar? Well, what were you finding were some of the more common questions that your audience had for you in that experience with the Academy?
mhm. Yeah, I think there was a lot about how to get started.
Yes. How do you
Questions.
even start? It's
Yeah,
overwhelming. Yeah.
we've been talking a lot about vague generalities
Right.
of marketing, and I think that was one question that was really helpful. And I think we really talked about starting with what's the goal, and what are you looking to achieve as an organization. And even that, right, with strategic planning can come with a little bit of marketing research and understanding the external environment through a SWOT analysis, which is a type of market research. Um, I think starting with a strategy, right? So if you're recruiting or if you're seeking, donations, or if you're fundraising, if you're looking to improve your training program, or if you're looking to figure out the best way to recognize volunteers in the community. I mean, I think all of these things are objectives that can be achieved with marketing.
And I liked your point earlier about you're doing internal persuasion as well. So if you think about marketing as invitation and persuasion, we often as leaders and volunteers have to make the case further up to leadership if we're not at the leadership table to get resources, to get additional paid staff to support volunteer services, or to get resources for the volunteers themselves, like workstations and things. And there's a difference in communicating to an internal leadership audience and an external, the public audience of certain demographics or backgrounds or skills that you're finding, what is that best first step so people don't feel like they're drinking from a fire hose trying to learn everything at once?
Yeah, I think so. Starting with a strategy, I think it might be okay. So thinking about your objective really truly is the first step. All market research is conducted around that objective. So even as you write your research questions and even as you design the type of research that you're going to do, it's really to achieve that goal. And the way we analyze data and the way we kind of collect data all are kind of biased by that, which is okay. It's not a bad thing. It's just that it should be in alignment and that the tools that you're using or the data that you collect help you accomplish that goal. So I'd say the first thing is establishing your objective. I think the next thing is to really figuring out how and what kind of methods you use. In my class at Johns Hopkins, I talk about and we kind of go over simple market research methods on a shoestring budget. Like, so if you're at the national level or at the local level, there are resources for you to do market research. At the national level, there's census data. There's plenty of research being done through AmeriCorps or Volunteer Match or VolPro and all of these other great resources. See what else is happening out there first, and design kind of your tools accordingly. I think if your objective is recruitment, understanding how big your audience is obviously is really important. Understanding what you might have, like your current audience or your current audience persona, and so identifying what your aspirational audience might be if you're hoping to diversify your volunteer pool. So I guess maybe that would be the second thing, is really trying to identify that audience. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Again, I think it really starts with looking at what data you already have and looking at which audiences you're already kind of engaging and going from there.
And I found that a lot of leaders of volunteers that I work with, again, whatever level they are in their organization and that hierarchy or structure, you actually probably have most leaders of volunteers, if you're using volunteer management software, and it doesn't matter which one or which company. I stay neutral on that topic, although I've worked for a lot of VMS companies, kind of advising them on market trends over the years and kind of best practices for doing webinars. But you probably have a lot of data from your CRM, from your email marketing program that you're using. And CRMs, it can be Salesforce, it could be HubSpot, it could be Sugar, it could be Neon, but kind of start to maybe do a self-evaluation of what data and information are you already collecting? What does that show you about who you're attracting as volunteers and who you already have? And then I also want to help define for folks who may be newer to these marketing terms that persona is, what is that ideal person from that talent pool look like? What's their background or other portions, or their skill sets, or are you looking to get to younger, to a youth volunteer drive? So that's kind of what we're talking about when we say a persona. It doesn't have to be narrow. It can be, ideally, we want to attract the widest variety of people to do any one volunteer role, kind of the inverse of HR, where you screen out a bunch of people and just have one person. We want to have as many people as possible able to do a volunteer role, and just help people understand some of the, because marketing, as with volunteer engagement, comes with its own jargon and its own ways of doing things and sayings. And again, if you're looking for the persona of retired, wealthier, whiter people, and that's who you're consistently attracting to your program, that's not bad at all. But if you want to expand into a wider audience, it just takes, like you said, some planning, some effort, some strategy to set up that campaign. And one of the things I love about your work, David, is you have like a template that you share with your consulting. So what are some of the basic points or pieces of that template that can help the layperson understand that marketing, in addition to what we've talked about already?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the first things we do in kind of some of my various roles is really start to think about how can we use this opportunity first to like develop expertise in the organization. So it's not just kind of doing this one-off project, but really thinking about this more holistically. So we always start with kind of framing that this isn't just a one-time project, that this is really a skill building activity. I think again, we talk about our outcomes. Is it website views? Is it social media clicks or followers, or is it applications and leads and successful recruits? We then also we stake out numbers. How many volunteers do you need to make the impact that you need to make this year, or that you want to make this year? What are your funders expecting? What have you been able to accomplish in the past, and how many have you been able to recruit? Or if there are zip codes in which you really need volunteers, is it easier to recruit from directly around the service location, or is it something that people could do across town? So I think there's a lot of kind of really general statistics or numbers. We also start with what's worked in the past, and we go through and we talk about, well, what have you done? Have you done mailers? Have you done door hangs? Have you done yard signs and other things? And I think, one thing that's important there is tracking, and maybe we'll talk about tracking later, but
Totally.
that's where we start next, is we start with what has been successful in the past. And then sometimes merging that with, or aligning that with, well, is that your target audience? And is that how you brought in your target audience? If not, then maybe we look towards other solutions.
Yeah, and speaking of setting up the understanding and building on the skills, but utilizing the tools in the toolbox that you have that have already been working, and then there's always room for improvement. So it shouldn't ever be a shame spiral of, oh, we keep getting the same volunteers over and over again. There's always opportunities to grow and expand the audience and expand that invitation and that appeal, and make sure that if people are coming on, that they are having a welcoming experience. They do start to get a sense of belonging, and they're not bumping up against hostility from paid staff resenting them. So kind of creating that welcoming atmosphere and making sure that the culture is inviting to volunteers to join from different personas, different backgrounds, different demographics than you've had before. I think that's important, so people have a gentle, pleasant place to land, because one of the core things of marketing is it's a call to action. You're driving people to a behavior, an action, to a destination if it's a website, or a work site if it's in person for volunteering. And you talked about kind of some of the classical, mailers or yard signs and physical things. What have you found to be effective in our online world? Once that market research is done and you're starting to design a campaign, where have you found some potential new audiences and on what platforms recently?
That's a really good question, and I would not be the expert in that. I think some of my larger scale campaigns really have that blanket approach, although there is some targeting with the affinities and the interests. So on social media, as you're targeting, number one, social media is really inexpensive for a campaign. So if
Hashtags are free. Yeah, hashtags are
hashtags
free.
are free,
Yeah.
but also paid promotion from an organizational account is much more inexpensive than a mailer. And especially if you're looking for technologically savvy individuals, starting with a digital channel is probably going to be your best bet. But again, it's super cheap, and you can really target who you're attracting using interests and affinities is what they're called. So on Facebook, you might say loves books, or has a background in education, or is interested in food security, things like that. So those are likely the main ways that large national organizations conduct social media campaigns. But again, I think generally it still continues to attract a very traditional volunteer audience. And so then definitely social media. And if not, I'd say a lot more direct outreach, but still can be happening through social media, right? Finding groups. And maybe making sure that you're not the individual reaching out to those groups if you don't belong to them, but making sure that somebody who you work with or who's a passionate volunteer, who's a great spokesperson, is interested and happy to do some of that work with you. One thing I wanted to go back to, if it's
Sure,
okay, we were
absolutely.
talking about how we understand our current audience.
Yes.
And we were talking about the use of volunteer management
Hmm.
software. And I think sometimes organizations have that volunteer management software, but may not be leveraging it for tracking demographics or
Exactly.
even psychographics, right? Like how do we connect that? And there's plenty of tools and ways that all of these systems are now integrated. So if you conduct a survey, an annual survey, or ever a volunteer satisfaction survey, and you ask questions of these and volunteers willingly, like opt in an opt-in way, fill out this form, you can definitely get and add more demographic and psychographic information to your volunteer management system. And if you don't have that opportunity and maybe it's too hard, then you could potentially do like a hackathon and have volunteers fill out informational cards for you or build their profile. If even if it's Word, I mean, like if it's a Word doc and you want to save all that information, I think there's a lot of opportunities. And obviously minding data security and personally identifying information, making sure that you're really secure in that way. But there's plenty of information out there, and if your volunteers are willing to support you with that, then it's definitely something to consider and explore.
Yeah, thanks for circling back to that. That's such an excellent point. And to your point of having people with that shared life experience or that shared background or parts of their persona being the ones to reach out, it's important to give messaging and recruitment training. And it can be a one-pager, it can be a 5-minute video you have on your website to all of your volunteers and all of your paid staff so that they can give the elevator pitch to anybody else they talk to. And that can be in someone's native language that they also speak. It can be in sign language if they're connected to the deaf community. But there are ways to responsibly leverage the talent that you already have to increase that outreach. And so I always want to emphasize to leaders and volunteers who are watching Priceless Advice or Tuesday Tips, it feels like you have to do everything on your own, but you don't. You can get the volunteers who want to do this, who get a simple messaging training to communicate and be more trusted by people that they're in those communities and part of that demographic themselves already. And yes, and I've had great success with volunteers who, like you, like marketing is their day job. They might be working at your food bank or your animal shelter or your after school program or whatever your organization does. But you can also look to not just the recruitment committee, but there might be people with real skills that can help you design this campaign as a special project. That's one of my favorite things to have as a volunteer role title is special project that matches their skills and experience that can take something off of your very full plate as a volunteer coordinator or manager or director.
Yeah, I feel like and I don't know, maybe it's the current market, but it feels like it's been hard for organizations to recruit administrative or higher level volunteers. And I'm not sure, it's something that I want to explore more, but currently not exploring that as a recruitment strategy, I guess, or like a overall organizational strategy. Last year, I did launch a couple word of mouth campaigns, which were incredibly successful and perhaps more successful. Actually, they were 100% more successful than large paid media campaigns. And it is about arming, volunteers with the resources to do that and the messaging or the templates and making it as easy as possible. And it really starts from day one too. It starts from onboarding. And that's not even day one. That's like day, I don't know, 50 or something.
Right.
But it starts with the messaging from the start. And it starts with their experience in your program. And it happens because of the recognition that they get that you're building an army of people to recruit for you. I don't know if you like the,
I totally, yeah, no,
the
that's great.
metaphor.
No, it's true. And again, like word of mouth is like that's never going to be a bad way to recruit and market. That's always going to be number one, whatever the fancy stuff and bells and whistles that we've talked about before. And the part that I find I do the most work around in consulting is creating that belongingness and that welcoming environment and shifting the organizational culture to make sure that it's not just a churn, because that's another issue that can come up with marketing. Oh, we've done this great marketing. We had a word of mouth campaign, and we got 100 new people in a month, which was 10 times more than we were hoping for. And, five of them stayed 6 months. So all of these things are, this is, like you said, this is a holistic system. All of these things, have to be looked at, not just in their details of campaign or logistics or messaging, but what is the bigger picture? And if we're giving them a call to action, a CTA, what happens when they complete that action? Are they still having a good experience as a volunteer? Do they feel like their work is meaningful? Do they feel like they're genuinely welcomed by the team? And my favorite catchphrase that I learned early in my career is every interaction with a volunteer is an invitation to stay or an invitation to go. And that interaction can be digital. It could be the first email. It could be them calling into the front desk, and whoever's covering the front desk during the administrator's lunch doesn't know what's going on and gives them bad information or is rude, all the way through to interviews and on their first shift and who's nice to them and who helps them out and do they feel like they have the information and the resources and the support to be effective in their role. So you can have the best marketing campaign in the world, but still not have retention of talent if once people get going, they're not having that good experience. Um, I also recommend, and I'm glad you brought it up again, that using whatever VMS or email marketing or CRM, client relationship management software, whatever you're using, and maybe talk to IT or development department if you're not the one who's directly using some of those other software programs. But getting all that information connected, again, like you said, depersonalizing it so you can run reports of like who's a volunteer, who's a donor, who's a client, if that's something that overlaps in the work you do. But there are ways to track that data kind of at each point of contact with a volunteer, including early marketing messaging of who clicked through to the website, who liked your post on social media. That's all very, very potentially useful and valuable information that can be shared, like you said, with funders in grant applications, making the case with leadership to add more to the volunteer services budget and to shift things around so that you do have the resources to be supported in your work. And in marketing these things, and particularly for recruitment, in that really successful word of mouth program, what amount of messaging or training did you do with those volunteers? Was that a couple hours? Was that a couple days? Like, what were some of the outline points of that messaging training that you gave to folks?
Yeah, well, I work in several federated models, and so I feel like most of what I do is create resources for sites and for partners to
Mhm.
implement. And so that's, another kind of step or kind of distance from
Mhm.
the work that I do and the audience and the individual who will receive, or the end user in a way. And so I generally, create a lot of trainings and make sure that, there are resources like slide decks, text message templates, email templates, social media templates and imagery or videos or ways that, a Canva template so that
Mhm.
volunteers can go in and write their quote and have a quote card that they post on social media that has your branding on it in the right way. I love Canva for that kind of
It's
work.
very easy to use. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
None of us are getting paid by Canva, by the way. It's just I use it for thumbnails and social media tiles. A lot of organizations use it. I will say my one tip for using something like Canva, especially in the age of AI generated images and kind of like a garbage in, garbage out amalgamation that can happen, is as much as possible use when volunteers sign up, have a degree of media release in their paperwork that we're just going to use this for promotion of the agency and not for these other reasons. We won't sell your data, assurances for trust and security. But ideally, use pictures from the work your actual volunteers are doing when you have those photo releases or media releases. And then the next step, if you can't always get the image you want from that, nominal fee with deposit photos or Shutterstock or Getty or iStock photos, uh, getting some licensed paid for stock photos. Never grab random stuff from the internet. That gets everybody in trouble, and it's usually poor quality. And as a last resort, and I'm saying this because I see this way too frequently, if you're using images from Canva, try not to use the AI generated stuff because people have extra fingers. But I see too many of the same images over and over and over again of the same models in the blue or the white or the green volunteer t-shirts. And I use stock photos that have some of that t-shirt vibe to it, but it really is much more sincere if you must use stock photos to at least get your own and then upload them into a program like Canva or whatever you're using as your own assets, because things like that can be really, free or very low cost for certain subscriptions and very effective, but not when everybody's using the same six-fingered AI stock photos from that program over and over again.
And I have one tip for this actually, which
Yes,
is
please.
I all the time, I don't understand why it's not a more common practice, but recruit volunteer students or interns or fellows from local colleges who are
Yes.
photography students. I just don't know why that's not happening in every single nonprofit everywhere. Like I really like I don't know.
I just did a Tuesday Tips a month or so ago on that exact topic of I advised a client to like you're in a city that has a lot of colleges, the San Diego area. There's tons of universities with media programs around you. Get a crew of students in to film trainings for volunteers or to shadow work or to do promotion. So 1,000% agree with that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one thing that we haven't talked about yet, but it's really making sure that all of these volunteers understand their impact. And so even with these special project volunteers, making sure that they know how much they're helping, how much they're saving your organization, how many volunteers they were recruited because of the imagery and the film that they produced, or how satisfied your volunteers were with the training videos. I think there's a lot of ways, and it takes a lot of thought and it takes some time, and so maybe recruit a volunteer to do that for you. but but I definitely think, you know, there's a lot of additional opportunities for us to engage individuals to help us with this work.
There are a lot of additional opportunities. And again, I love the umbrella term special project volunteer, short term, long term, one off. It can be over the course of years. I regularly recruited volunteers who were photography experts and videographers and editors and people who liked to do that kind of thing. Either they did it professionally and they did a certain amount of in-kind donation time for it, or they just were really great amateurs and just happened to, again, have that high specific skill level and enjoy doing it as their hobby or for fun or to learn a new skill. And there's somebody out there that can do anything and everything for you. It's just a matter of figuring out what talent pool, where that person might be, and again, using census data, things that are publicly available, information and data that you can get online at federal level, state level, local level, municipal, county level. A little bit of kind of strategic thinking or pre-production planning goes a long way. It ends up saving a lot of time and not wasting yours or volunteers' time down the line if you really have that messaging dialed into the audience and the focus. And I'll give the extra tip that you'll probably agree with, which is that the thing that you say on Facebook or Instagram or Threads or what used to be Twitter or Spoutable or any of those things is different than how you phrase something on LinkedIn, is different than what you put in a flyer, is probably a little bit different than what you have on your landing page, on your organizational website. So again, you don't have to do this all by yourself. If you're interested in it, it's a fun thing to dive into and get wonky about and hear from experts like you and others, or go onto YouTube and find videos about it that are from highly rated experts, and a 5 or 10 or 15 minute video beyond just my channel on how to do marketing or editing or figure these things out. But the resources are out there, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming to take those first steps, to think of what's the outcome, what's the goal, what do you want to achieve from this, rather than just, I just want to churn through people and get more warm bodies because the warm bodies aren't staying. That's a symptom of a bigger problem to solve. You can absolutely help volunteers understand the meaningful impact they're having, and especially if they're working remote, working online, doing research or something that is not always on site or in community with you or other volunteers or staff, or like you're talking about this national work or global work where there's these far reaching impacts to different chapters or different sites. Still crucially important that all volunteers understand the meaning of their impact, why it's specifically important, and how it changed someone's life or made something better, whether that's internally for the organization or externally for members of their own community.
Yeah, for that, I implemented something, and I haven't evaluated whether or not it's successful, but like kind of header photos in volunteer management systems, and
Yeah.
I think generally there's some generic like background with the logo, kind of like this background,
Mhm.
and it, or like in your logo. That's an opportunity. I've created messaging that shares the impact so that they're reminded of their impact every time they log on, right? It's not just, there's so many opportunities to reaffirm and share with volunteers their impact, and it's almost important to do it at every turn. And so something like as simple as a volunteer management software header image is a great place to say, 96% of the community was served through this program, or some the intended community.
And that's good for organizational brand consistency, for consistency with your program. And again, I run into all too often different departments who are going after different audiences and different goals, like development and volunteer services and maybe marketing or PR. They might be doing three different things that look three different ways. And so I, again, recommending that if you're taking on this effort for the first time, or you're kind of honing your marketing skills and you're not yet aligned with what the agency marketing is doing, and other departments are doing, and what audiences, that's a fantastic place to make sure that you're connected and you're building rapport with your colleagues inside the organization and interdepartmentally, to make sure that this is consistent, and that someone who's getting a messaging about volunteering and then also getting a messaging about being a donor isn't seeing drastically different branding or imaging from the agency, sometimes even like not using the logo in the same way. So, these are some great kind of foundational practices. I think it's useful for everybody to know who's working in nonprofit, especially working with volunteers, and how much volunteers and donor interactions can overlap, and understanding they're not getting 5 messages from 5 different departments.
Yeah, 100%. I could not agree more. And I also think that it's just a different, and this is actually a trend that's happening in marketing too. In the past, there's the funnel approach, right?
Right.
Probably many people have heard about the funnel approach, where you're kind of spraying the as widely as possible, creating as big a reach and funneling it down till you have kind of leads. And we talked about how that's not effective anymore. And so
Yeah.
what we're seeing, and it's kind of with the rise of social media, is that audiences themselves have become like the goal, right?
Mhm.
Building an audience, building a community of people who support your organization. So whether or not they're volunteering in this program or they're donating at this time, it's not about those one-off interactions. It's about having this following of individuals that care about the work that you do, that see the impact that you have, keeping them engaged, so that when you do have those opportunities for them, when you know what their segments are and you have this data about their demographics or their psychographics, and you can kind of tell who might be interested in what opportunities, then targeting those opportunities when the time is right. So I would argue, in a way, it's not just about this communication and marketing strategy that you have for this one-time goal, but your goal always should be overall to build community in your area or for your organization and your mission.
Yeah, building community and building relationships. And to me, trust is the currency in all of this. Trust is the currency of volunteer engagement. Trust is the currency of donor engagement, any kind of community engagement. And to the points at the beginning of this Priceless Advice interview, if you have some resistance of like, oh, marketing feels icky or manipulative, or I don't feel, or I'm uncomfortable doing self-promotion or promoting this, then turn it around of talking about trust and truth and transparency in this all the time so that people do have a sincere communication or messaging coming to them, and then they have an experience that, as closely as possible matches what expectations we've set for them, that we're setting and meeting their expectations or exceeding their expectations in having a volunteer experience, and knowing it's impactful and meaningful. And I think thinking of like that funnel model, I've also talked about it in some of my own webinars and videos about that old-fashioned kind of Mad Men era, the pyramid model, where again the wide audience, you're driving them like a sheepdog or a border collie, into that funnel, into that little pen of maybe a call to action or being a major donor or board member. And I like to use the visual of, if there's an image of an individual, fanning out from that are a number of roles that they occupy and go between at all times. So someone who they're talking to or communicating to or hoping to recruit, they could be a client, a volunteer, a board member, a donor, a fan of your work. In a partner organization that you work with, there can be a lot of personas. There could be a lot of overlapping aspects to that person that you can appeal to at different times in different ways, that builds on that trust, that builds on that sense of community and relationship, and not just in the crass way of like, I want more followers and be an influencer, man. But again, we're in a very different modern online landscape of data mining, information, the ability to very easily and inexpensively focus on a particular audience demographic or someone with particular likes. It could be, someone who watches a lot of cat videos might want to work at the animal shelter as a foster person or whatever. Like there's real, this is our economy right now, is kind of connecting these data points as a huge driver in everything we're doing. And it's incredibly useful and important to understand that for your organization and for your volunteer program, and just as an individual whose data is being mined all the time anyway, and to understand and start to recognize when you're being targeted with advertisements for certain things. One of my favorite games is to confuse algorithms as much as possible so that I get the weirdest possible Facebook ads that have nothing to do with my real life.
Mhm.
As a
I know
kind of a
exactly.
game, kind of gaming the system. But again, like, it's a tool in the toolbox. How are you going to utilize these things? With great power comes great responsibility, but you can absolutely use these same tools in a really positive, wonderful way that helps the communities that we're working with.
Yeah, the game I play with my students every class is what's the strategy, and so we try to and we look at the an advertisement and we try to guess and kind of work backwards as to what the audience is and the demographics, the target audiences and their demographics and their psychographics and what the strategy was to appeal to that audience. So I do it all the time. One time I had this Facebook ad that was all about data security, and there were imagery of like DC, and there was a female, a non-white individual who was like the spokesperson, and it was really modern. And I was like, is this is this what like I've aligned with online?
I love it when I get the ads for the most ridiculous things that have nothing to do with me or my life, and I know that, like, okay, I'm at least fooling some of the bots some of the time and rejecting enough cookies that I'm not being completely accurately advertised to. But
Mhm.
we're not that far away from Minority Report where they just beam things into your eyeballs all the time,
Right.
and you're constantly walking through holograms of ads. It can feel that way, but it's such a joy to have you on Priceless Advice, David, and I really admire your work. I am going to share where people can follow your work. And we'll just emphasize that, you're talking as yourself, you teach and you work for a large organization, but you're speaking as your own expertise and not representing schools or other agencies that you work with or for. But I'm so glad to have your expertise on marketing, on communications, and have this genuinely priceless advice from you and your Tuesday tips as well. And is there anything else as a final little bit of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience today?
I guess maybe the main takeaway really is set aside some time and do a little bit of research and try to think about where you're operating and who you're trying to reach. And I think it'll go a long way. I think it's just having that time to strategize and collect the data needed to do that. I feel like there are plenty of also like resources online for marketing and for recruiting. I know Volunteer Match has some great resources and so many others. And so I'd say, actually reach out. Probably the best way to reach me is LinkedIn, to be honest, these days, but reach out and I'm happy to direct you to any or anybody to any kind of resources that really will fit the need of what's going on. I think that there's just too much out there. It's just maybe we don't spend enough time looking for it. So
Exactly. And Volunteer Pro, Toby Johnson, fantastic research. Her 2024 report on volunteer engagement, fantastic survey that she's done every year. It's, again, incredibly useful data and information and a good snapshot of how our sector is doing as practitioners. She's one of the few who asks leaders of volunteers themselves what they're doing and how they're doing it and what's going on. And Volunteer Match, again, Alive, volunteeralive.org. You don't have to be a member of any of these things. You can choose to have membership or subscriptions, but there's a lot of information that's just free to anybody who wants to utilize it. And I will link to your LinkedIn and how to get in touch with you, and ideally the archived recording from Alive for your recent webinar, because that's fantastic information for people to have a deeper dive into this topic with your expertise. And again, thank you, David, so much for sharing your priceless advice with us and your Tuesday tips. And everyone out there, if you have any questions, put them in the comments and David or I will get the answers to you. And we hope you have a great rest of the week. Take care.
awesome. Thank you, Dana.